okay, the only one. So Ruben and I are going to share very briefly some comments, our own introduction on why we're here and what racism is, starting with Ruben.
Yeah, sure. So I think it will be fair enough for us to say as well why we are here. Well, I have a vested interest in the subject matter we're discussing today. I have a lived experience of racism, and I also want to see the National Action Plan to Racism come into life. There's a lot of policy that has gone up and not much that has been done. And a lot of you have said that you've been working on racism as community workers. As a community worker, I really want to see change, one, on a personal reason, and also to see that the community that I belong to is also enjoying, because racism is a human right, even though it's not named, but I am going to show in some of my slides how we can actually adopt the human rights approach to racism. So those are some of the tips that we can say. So just as a human right and a personal capacity, I have a vested interest in the anti-racist agenda. And I'm going to share my slides now. Or before I do that, I think some of you we have met before in different spaces. So I'm Ruben Hambakachere. I'm a community worker with Culture Migrant Center, and I'm also an intercultural facilitator. And I'm in this space to contribute to the conversation. I don't have the monopoly of knowledge, and I'm also here to learn from you guys. And I'm sharing this space with Anastasia today. So I'll let Anastasia introduce herself before I share my slides.
Okay. So I'm Anastasia Crickley. I've experienced racism as an Irish person in the UK, which begins to create another dynamic around racism, which is not one of colour, but a very real one for any of us who are Irish in the UK in the 1970s. And I've worked against racism for most of my life, starting with that period, really, and continuing in a number of different roles, including with the UN Committee for the Elimination of Racism and with the first National Action Plan Against Racism, and as part of the group that was responsible for developing the second National Action Plan Against Racism. In an Irish context, I've also been particularly conscious of the racism experienced from the very beginning by travellers and also by Roma, and of the way in which the diversity that has always been part of Ireland has been denied. So that's really enough about me, but I was going to say there were just a few slides we had that we were going to share at this stage. Do you want to go first, Ruben, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first, yeah. Thanks, Anastasia. And I think you've made a very valid point there when you're saying that racism is beyond color, because I think that's something that people have asked, and that some people will always come to me and ask when I deliver these workshops, can a Black person be racist? Yes, they can be racist, but that needs to be explained how that works, because it's not about color. And we need to move beyond the conversation where we just see race as color and racism as color. And I think it's very important when we are framing our conversation that we understand. So that's why I'm beginning from this definition. So this definition of racism, I have adopted this. There are many other definitions that some of you gave, which were very succinct, like Anastasia said, and those are all okay. But I use these for the purpose of today's conversation. So it's any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, national or ethnic origin, which is the purpose of effect of modifying or impairing the recognition, the enjoyment of or exercise on equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedom in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. This constitutes to racial discrimination. So going back to that human rights approach, I use this definition because it mentioned the human rights, and it also covers the social pillars, political, economic, and social, and cultural. So it covers everyone. And it's not only looking at that, it's based on race, color, descent. So depending on where you're from, and if some of us can experience racism because it's visible, people can see the color of our skin, and then some people can experience racism because of their ethnicity, and you'll not be able to see the difference of skin, but this was something that came so true to me when I came to Ireland, because I've always imagined growing up in the southern part of Africa and also growing up in my adult life in South Africa, I experienced a lot of racism there. And when I always believed at the time that racism was only an experience from a white person to a black person. So when I came to Ireland and I saw what was happening in Ireland, from white settled people to the travelers, I was shocked, and I had to educate myself to get to that understanding, to see what is really happening. And I think it's very important that we have that on a human rights perspective, because you can make that argument when you are having a conversation about racism, because when you talk about human rights, people can understand that. And when you explain that this is exclusion or restriction or preference based on those things that I've named, the people can also understand that. So I think for me, this definition is what, as community workers, we can embrace this because it covers a lot, but you can also embrace the ones that you have given us today. And then I have another definition that I always use to explain to someone who is trying to grapple with the first one that I gave. Is the negative attitudes towards others perceived to be different. And I think that one is a simplified version. I know sometimes we need to have a simplified version when you want to have this conversation, because let's before we go any further, Anastasia said that this is a challenging space, and we need to approach this subject knowing that there are some people who are in denial of racism, and there's some people that don't even want to have a conversation. It's a very difficult conversation to have. It's uncomfortable for others, and people always want to shy away from this conversation. And when I'm introducing this conversation, depending on who I'm presenting the issue to, I go with those two different definitions. The one that I would go with when someone doesn't understand where I'm coming from is just the negative attitudes towards others perceived to be different. And then I also explain to people that it's not enough to say I'm non-racist. So you can say I'm non-racist, but if you're not doing anything about it, you have to be actively anti-racist. And I would encourage and offer to us who are in this space today, because we are here to learn from each other, that let's move away from that I'm not racist rhetoric and go and actually move a step further, where we would say I'm actively anti-racist. So my last slide before we move on to Anastasia is just looking at the different types of racism that are there. And these slides are available to, they're going to be shared. So I'm not going to read the long sentences there. You're going to read at your own time. So there's individual racism, which is, this is the racism that I would experience, for example, or you would experience. And then institutional racism, it's a difficult type of racism to recognize because it's embedded within the systems and policy that we use even to do our own work. So this is something that is very difficult. And also the institutional racism, which also is in policy and it's systematic. Some of you have already named that systematic racism in your introductions. And then also this is an example of institutional racism. I've given that one that I think some of you have come across this. Travelers booking a wedding or banning headscarves in public, banks or schools taking one denomination, for example, Catholic. And then also cultural racism. This is also, all this that I'm naming here, they are also available they're listed in the definition that I gave. So cultural racism happens when the values or belief systems of one ethnic group or so-called race are considered superior than values and belief systems of minority ethnic groups are considered inherently unfair. So we go back then now, another thing that causes racism, one of the reasons of racism is our own beliefs, the way we are socialized, the way we're raised, and our belief system. We live in a culture that unfortunately promotes and elevates the white society or white culture. And it's about us beginning from the point of admitting and accepting that racism is real. Just because you have not experienced racism, it doesn't mean that it's not real. So I'll leave us at that, and Anastasia will continue from here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruben. I just want to say a very short few words which add a little bit, a few extra thoughts to what Ruben has been saying. The definition that Ruben has given you is the one that's used in the UN Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. In fact, in a rather cumbersome way, it incorporates all of the things that a number of you have been saying this morning. But why use it rather than any other, in addition to the things Ruben has been saying? I use it because it's what the Irish state has signed up to and agreed to be reviewed under as part of our international human rights commitments. Therefore, it's a solid starting point for any initiative or any action that any of us might take in this state. One of the important things that has been added with through the National Action Plan Against Racism, though, in addition to the institutional racism that Ruben has been talking about, and I wonder, Ciara, if you would mind putting up that slide for me, please. The systemic is a definition of racism as being systemic. And what do we mean by being, no, sorry, it's the systemic, no, it's okay, I can manage that, I'll go on to the community work bit in 1 second. It's the systemic understanding of racism as being embedded in our structures, therefore inevitably appearing in our institutions, inevitably being reflected in all of the things that happen for people, and inevitably been an experience of people who are treated in a racist fashion. So I'm saying the individual institutional racism and cultural racism, all of these are really a manifestation of the extent to which racism is actually, is in effect systemic in our society. Okay, the reason though why I'm here today is because I'm a community worker, and thanks, Ciara, those are the slides then, and because I believe that as a community worker, our commitment as community workers, and the purpose of this workshop is really to try to continue our thinking, refine our thinking, embed our thinking with regard to community work responses to racism. So I'd like to remind us really of the understanding of racism, or of community work that's contained in the standards that Ciara was talking about, earlier. Ciara, if you can manage to get that one up, great, but don't worry. So this is the systemic definition of systemic racism. But then the community work is a developmental activity of a task and a process. Now, you all know this definition, but in effect, if we look at it, it's concerned with to achieving equality, social justice, and human rights through the process of implication of those tasks and processes. So it's based on values that are collective, that are about empowerment, about social justice and sustainable development, about human rights, equality, and anti-discrimination, and about participation. And my question really to myself and to all of us as community workers is about how we could pretend to undertake any activity that related to any of these areas without being anti-racist. In the same way as maybe for many years now, we have been able to at least say, whether we do it or not is another question, to at least say that we wouldn't undertake this sort of activity unless we acknowledge the oppression of women. So I think as a starting point, as a community worker, for me, the discipline, the profession, the area of work that I have chosen to work in throughout my life is one that calls for an anti-racist perspective, one that, in effect, in order to do it in line with the definitions that we've put up, require an anti-racist perspective. And then you might ask, well, why is she using those definitions? Are they just something that are in the All-Ireland values put together by the All-Ireland body for the endorsement of community work and Community Work Ireland in partnership? And reflecting also the views of a wide variety of practitioners and people involved around the country, because there was a very wide consultation in the process of developing them. So is that just something that's out of their mindset? But I have to say that this definition and this understanding is also reflected in the government strategy, Sustainable, Inclusive and Empowered Communities, also reflected in the values and principles of the Department of Rural and Community Development. Again, you might say, what does that mean? But that means that these are the values and these are the processes that those departments are committed to. And inter alia, these are the things that community workers and community work initiatives supported through them ought also to be able to demonstrate. So that's my starting point for today. And that's enough about me for now. But now we'd like to ask all of you to retreat into small groups of 6 for 6 minutes. And what we want you to do is say, where do you fit with all of this? We moved a little bit. We've had a very interesting set of introductions. We no doubt have a whole lot of great practice to share at a later stage. But where do you fit with all of this and with what you've heard so far? So groups of 6 for 6 minutes, and then we'll have a very short feedback. Okay.
Hi there. I don't know if I stepped out for a second or I don't know what happened to my laptop. Did I miss anything? You are on mute, Anne.
I'm going to put you into a small group. Just hold on a second. Adriana. Why can't I see your name?
And what was the question I missed already
The
from
question
Stacia?
was
What
just
she said?
responses. Just the responses to what you've heard so far.
Okay, thank you.
There, I should have you assigned
Thank you.
now. Cheryl, you're the same.
You're there in workshop 6 in room 6, Cheryl. And do you want to?
I think Cheryl might be frozen.
Oh,
Yeah, I think she might actually be frozen.
Can I check if you can hear me now?
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks.
I think everybody else has been assigned.
I'm really sorry about that.
You can't help it.
Okay, what can you do?
I know. Did you notice that Dahi was power washing something outside and was tripped a fuse? I think is what happened anyway.
Okay. Do you think we should send a message to them all just with the
I did.
Did you?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I broadcast, so hopefully, and we
Okay.
started at 12:05, so 6 minutes from 12:05.
Yeah. How come I can't? Is it because you set up the breakout rooms, Anne? I can't send a message to them. Oh no, I can. I see it. Yeah, no, I can see broadcast. Yeah.
I left out the co-hosts out of the rooms, which is us. I didn't actually mean to send Ruben and Stacia in. I don't know why they went in.
No, I got an invitation to join us.
Oh, did
Yeah,
you?
I got an invitation too, but I just
Yeah.
didn't join.
Yeah, same here.
I Stacia's.
So Bernie isn't in a way. Bernie isn't in.
Bernie
one.
isn't in the room though. She's left.
I think she's
left her
frozen.
physical room
Oh,
as well.
she.
So yeah.
I think so because her reception, even despite how bad my reception was, she was one of the first to introduce herself, and her reception wasn't great.
Oh, okay.
Isn't she the woman who worked in Culture?
Yeah.
Or volunteered at Culture?
She's a volunteer. She teaches English. She did our introduction to community work 3-4 session thing last year.
That is such a headache when you're.
Oh, Ciara, I'd say you're just sweating.
Well, it's just because of the slides. I have no idea what order Stacey's slides are in because
I have
got
them open
7
here
different.
on my phone.
I have them open on the. I have them open here on the.
But it's just 7 different emails from her.
I
and
know,
then some of the
but when you're
emails.
sharing, you don't know what one is coming up next, so
Yeah,
you don't know when
exactly.
to flip it
Yeah,
on.
yeah. If you
So
don't
I
have
have
it
them open on.
yourself.
So I have them open on my phone now as well as on the screen, so I can. That's I swear to God.
Oh.
Is Sherry back again? Maybe she went out and rejoined. Sherry, can you hear us?
I wonder, is there a problem with her connection as
Yeah,
well?
because I think she froze there for a while.
Yeah,
Then you disappeared, Sherry, and now you're back. You've just muted yourself.